My name is Noah, and this happened when I was 24 years old. For 3 summers, I worked at a small roadside motel near the coast. It wasn't the kind of place people wrote reviews about. Just a strip of 10 rooms, a gravel lot, and a pool out back surrounded by a wooden fence that had gone gray and soft with salt air. The kind of motel people stopped at because it was cheap, or because the next town was still an hour away. Most guests stayed a night, maybe 2. They left before I learned their names, but there were regulars, people who came back every summer like the tide. One of them was a man everyone just called Eric, though I couldn't tell you who started calling him that, or how the name attached itself to him in the first place. He never introduced himself. He never made small talk at the front desk. I don't actually remember checking him in, not once, in 3 summers. He was just already there when the season started, already settled into room 12, the way a piece of furniture is just already in a room you walk into. He was probably in his mid-30s, quiet, polite in the way people are when they don't want to be noticed. Every evening, without fail, he'd walk out to the pool and sit in the same plastic chair at the deep end. He never swam. He never brought a book or a drink or his phone. He just sat there, hands on his knees, watching the water. I remember joking about it with another employee, a girl named Priya who worked the night shift. We used to watch him from the office window and laugh, quietly, the way you laugh about something that makes you a little uneasy. I told her it looked like he was guarding the pool. She said it looked like he was waiting for something to surface. Neither of us thought much of it. Guests are strange. That was the whole job, really, learning which kinds of strange to ignore. Every summer, same room, same chair, same hour, always just after the sun went down, always until it got too dark to see him from the office. Then one year, he didn't come. At first nobody noticed. People skip vacations. Life gets in the way. Priya mentioned it once, almost in passing, no Eric this year, and we moved on. It was months later, deep into fall, when the first complaint came in. A guest had checked into room 12. Around midnight, he showed up at the office, still in his socks, looking like he hadn't decided whether he was more annoyed or unsettled. He asked if someone had been outside his window. I asked what he meant. He said he'd woken up, looked out toward the pool, and seen a man sitting in one of the chairs, not moving, just facing the water. I told him it was probably another guest who couldn't sleep. He didn't look convinced, but he went back to his room, and I didn't think about it again until the next morning, when I walked the property and found every chair empty. I checked the register. No one else was staying at the motel that night except him. Life moved on. It always does, until it doesn't. The complaint came again, weeks later. A different guest, this time an older woman traveling alone. Same story, almost word for word. A man in a chair by the deep end, not moving, facing the water like he was waiting for the surface to do something. Always the same chair. Always facing the same direction. After the 3rd report, I started pulling the security footage whenever someone mentioned it. Most nights, there was nothing, just the pool, black and still, the way it's supposed to look at 3 a.m. Then, one night in late October, I finally saw it. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. A man walked out of room 12, crossed the pool deck in that same unhurried way, and sat down in the chair. The footage was grainy, the kind of gray digital fuzz cheap cameras produce in low light, but I knew him immediately. Eric. The problem was that room 12 was empty. It had been empty for 6 days. No one had rented it that week. I'd checked the ledger myself that afternoon because a pipe had needed fixing. I rewound the tape, slowly, frame by frame, half expecting to find some ordinary explanation waiting for me in the gaps. The door to room 12 never opened. There was no frame where the handle turned, no frame where the door swung outward. One moment the deck outside the room was empty. The next, he was already several steps into his walk toward the pool, as if the camera had simply forgotten to record the part where he appeared. I watched it 3 times. Each time, I felt a little more like I shouldn't be watching it at all. For nearly 2 hours, he didn't move. He sat with his hands on his knees, exactly the way I remembered, facing the deep end, while the timestamp ticked forward in the corner of the screen like nothing unusual was happening. At 4:03 a.m., he stood, walked to the edge of the deep end, and stepped out of frame. The camera's angle only covered the deck, never the water itself. A blind spot I hadn't thought twice about in 3 summers of watching that same monitor. I waited for him to come back into view. People don't just vanish off the edge of a pool. I told myself that, watching the empty rectangle of concrete where he'd been standing seconds before. He never reappeared. The next frame showed the deck exactly as it always looked at that hour. Empty, undisturbed, as if nothing had crossed it in hours. I went back through every other camera on the property that night. The parking lot camera, the one over the office door, the one at the far end of the building that barely worked. Nothing. No sign of him leaving the pool area. No sign of anyone entering it in the first place, other than that one gap in the footage where he simply was. I didn't sleep much after that. A week later, curiosity got the better of me, and I went digging through the motel's old paper records, boxes of them stacked in the back office that nobody had touched in years. I found Eric's name eventually. Not under any name I recognized as a surname, just Eric scrawled in the reservation book the way regulars sometimes got written, on a first-name basis with the front desk. His last reservation was 5 years earlier. There was nothing after that. No cancellations, no note. The book simply stopped mentioning him, the way a conversation stops when someone leaves the room without saying goodbye. I asked the owner about him. He was an older man, gruff, not usually one to entertain questions about guests who'd come and gone years before I started. But the moment I said room 12, something changed in his face, a kind of tiredness that hadn't been there a second earlier. He told me Eric's last visit had ended strangely. He'd checked in for a full week, like always, but by everyone's best guess he'd left after only 2 days. At least, that was the story that got passed around. His car had stayed in the lot until the following afternoon. His suitcase was still in the room, clothes folded inside it. The bed looked slept in, the towels used. But nobody, not the owner, not the housekeeper, not the guests in the rooms on either side, remembered seeing him leave or hearing a car pull away or anything at all out of the ordinary. I asked if the police had been involved. The owner hesitated long enough that I almost regretted asking. Then he nodded. Eric's family had reported him missing several days after his checkout date passed with no word from him. There had been an investigation, brief and thin on details, the kind that fades out rather than concluding. No body, no witnesses, no real leads. Eventually, it went cold, and the motel kept renting out room 12 like nothing had ever happened in it. For months after that conversation, I found myself thinking about him at odd hours. Locking up the office late at night, I'd catch myself glancing toward the pool before I could stop myself. Then came my last week working there, before I left for school in the fall. One night, long after the other guests had gone quiet, I walked out to the pool by myself. I told myself I wanted to see the water at night one more time before I left. That wasn't entirely true. Part of me wanted to see him. Part of me was relieved when I didn't. The pool lights were off. The water had that flat, oily blackness it gets under a moonless sky, the kind where you can't tell how deep it goes just by looking. As I walked around toward the deep end, something on the concrete caught my eye, faint lines in the surface, the kind you'd miss entirely in daylight with people walking over them. I crouched down and ran my fingers over them. They weren't cracks. They were letters, carved by hand, long since worn soft by weather and feet and years. Most of it had faded past reading, but near the edge, still just barely legible, were 4 letters. Eric. I stayed crouched there longer than I meant to. Something about kneeling at the edge of that water, in the dark, with his name half erased under my hand, made the whole night feel thinner than it should have. The next morning, before my shift ended for good, I found the retired maintenance worker who still stopped by sometimes to fix things the new guy couldn't. I asked him if he remembered Eric. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me for a long moment, the way people look at you when they're deciding how much of something to hand over. Then he asked, "Did they ever tell you what was found in the pump room?" I told him no. I'd never even known there was a pump room. He glanced toward the pool, toward the little service door built into the fence I'd walked past 100 times without noticing. "Maybe that's for the best," he said. I asked what he meant. He waved a hand, like he was pushing the question away, and started talking about something else entirely. A broken filter, a part he needed to order. And I understood, somehow, that the conversation about Eric was over whether I liked it or not. I never got an explanation. I never found any records that mentioned a pump room, or what might have been inside it. Nobody else at the motel would talk about it at all, not directly. A change of subject here, a why do you want to know there, until I stopped asking. I left for school a few days later and never went back. To this day, I don't know what happened to Eric. I don't know if he drowned, or wandered off and started over somewhere new, or if someone did something to him that no one ever wanted to say out loud. I don't know what was or wasn't found in a pump room I never saw the inside of. All I know is that every person who ever claimed to see him told the same story, down to the smallest detail. A man sitting beside the pool, late at night, in the same chair, facing the same direction, watching the deep end, like he was still waiting to see what would come up.
My name is Evan, and this happened when I was 26 years old. At the time, I worked the night shift at a small self-storage facility on the outskirts of town. The place had hundreds of storage units spread across several long rows. During the day, customers came and went constantly. At night, it was usually just me. I knew the property well. I drove the same security route every evening, checked the same gates, locked the same buildings. After 2 years, I could tell when something felt out of place. One rainy Thursday night, something did. Around 11:30 p.m., I noticed a storage unit standing open. Unit 214. The door was raised about a foot off the ground, just enough to create a dark gap. I immediately recognized the unit number. The renter had been using it for years, a man named Daniel, quiet guy, paid on time, rarely visited. I parked the golf cart and walked over. The rain had gotten heavier. Water dripped from the metal roofs. I called out, no response. I crouched down and looked beneath the door, nothing but darkness. Thinking someone had forgotten to close it properly, I pulled the door shut and continued my patrol. The next evening, Unit 214 was open again. Same height, same gap. I walked over. This time I checked the lock, still secured. The lock was attached exactly as it should have been, which made no sense. The door couldn't be partially open if it was locked, yet somehow it was. I stood there staring at it for several seconds, then I lowered it again. The following night, it happened a third time. At exactly 11:30 p.m., Unit 214, 1 foot open, lock attached. My stomach sank. At that point, I decided to review the security footage. The cameras showed the row clearly. At 11:27 p.m., the unit was closed. At 11:28 p.m., the image briefly distorted. Just a second of static. When the picture returned, the door was open. No person, no vehicle, nothing, just open. I showed the footage to my manager the next morning. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he asked me something strange. Was it Unit 214? I nodded. The manager sighed. Then he told me not to worry about it. That answer bothered me. For the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Then one night, I noticed something new. A folding chair, placed directly in front of Unit 214. I knew it hadn't been there earlier. The facility was closed. Nobody should have been inside. I approached slowly. The entire property was silent. As I got closer, I noticed the chair was facing the unit, as if someone had been sitting there, watching it. I looked around. Nobody. Then I noticed something else. The concrete beneath the chair was dry. Everything else around it was wet from the rain. I suddenly felt very uncomfortable. I left the chair where it was and returned to the office. The next morning, it was gone. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the rental records. Daniel had rented Unit 214 for almost 11 years, but something stood out. The emergency contact section was blank. No family, no alternate number, nothing. I searched the payment history. The rent was still being paid automatically every month, without fail, for 11 years. That night, I asked my manager about Daniel. The moment I mentioned the name, he looked away. Then he said something I'll never forget. I've never met him. I laughed. What do you mean? The manager had worked there for 8 years, longer than I had. He shook his head. Nobody has. The original rental agreement had been signed before he started. Every payment arrived electronically. Every phone call went to voicemail. No one had physically seen the renter in years. I felt a chill run through me. The next night, I decided to stay near Unit 214. At 11:20 p.m., I parked my cart at the end of the row and waited. Nothing happened. 11:25, 11:27, 11:28. Then I heard it, a sound from inside the unit. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. My blood ran cold. A few seconds later, 3 more knocks, from inside. I stared at the door. The lock remained attached. Nobody could be inside. The knocking continued. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the unit. The sound stopped immediately. The entire facility became silent. I reached the door, and that's when I noticed something I had somehow missed before. There were scratches on the metal, thousands of them, most hidden beneath years of paint. The marks stretched around the inside edge of the door, as if something had repeatedly scraped against it from within. I stepped back. For the first time since working there, I felt genuinely afraid. The next day, I demanded answers from my manager. Eventually, he gave in. According to him, about 12 years earlier, police had been called to the facility. A customer had complained about a smell. The odor led them to Unit 214. When they opened it, they found Daniel's car parked inside, his wallet, his keys, his phone, but no Daniel. Nothing indicated he had ever left, no signs of a struggle, no blood, no evidence of a crime, just an abandoned storage unit full of personal belongings. The case went nowhere. Officially, Daniel became a missing person. The unit was never emptied, because nobody could legally prove he was dead. I asked why the rent was still being paid. My manager simply shrugged. The payments never stopped. A month later, I quit. I told myself it was because I found a better job. The truth is I couldn't stand driving past Unit 214 every night. Years later, I read an online article about long-term missing persons. Daniel's name was mentioned. The article included a photograph. I recognized him immediately. What disturbed me wasn't the picture. It was the date. The article stated Daniel disappeared 13 years ago. Yet I clearly remember seeing someone standing near Unit 214 on my very first night working there, a man watching me from the end of the row. At the time, I assumed he was a customer. I even waved, he waved back, and then walked behind Unit 214. When I went to see where he'd gone, nobody was there. Sometimes I still wonder if I actually saw Daniel that night, or if I saw the last person who knew what happened to him.